All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. For everybody that's listening, Matthew, we're all calling in and from a remote place, and Matthew is driving the show here, so I'm going to ask him to advance slides. And please interrupt us as we're going along here. If there's anything that you want to talk about, you can send that through the chat to Matthew, and that'll be great. Doug, anything you want to say to the group?
Well, welcome everyone. Hope we have a good discussion today. And Jim, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. We're talking about Chapter 4 of the practice guide. So Matthew, you can go to the first slide there, and it starts on page 71, and the focus of this conversation is meetings. And generally define the purpose of meetings related to our construction projects is either the sharing of information, the exchanging of ideas, and also for the making of decisions. So with the basis of those things as the outline for project meetings, let's go to the next slide and offer something here that's in the practice guide that's important to remember. As you set up your meetings for a project site, for a construction project, always keep in the back of your mind these three principles which spell out how. First of all, if you're going to have a meeting, there needs to be established a specific intended outcome. Don't have meetings just for the sake of having meetings. There should be something that necessitates this gathering, and it obviously is something that is important to the project and requires people to get together perhaps face-to-face, perhaps virtually, as we're doing, but it's important to stay on the topic of that purpose. There also should be an agenda, which is published ahead of time, so that the content of what's going to be discussed can be shared, and so that the people that are a part of this meeting can be best prepared to come and productively participate. And also there should be limits on the time. Everyone is busy. Everyone has a lot to do. It shows great respect for the people involved when you set a meeting. You start that meeting on time, you stay on topic, and you finish that meeting on time. And with these principles of how as a basis for setting up your meeting, this begins the contribution, or continues, I guess I should say, the contribution of being a team-oriented group, having that team approach with all of the participants on your project. Doug, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think we can keep going.
Okay. Well, Matthew, let's take a look at the next slide. So this meeting process, of course, will be different depending on the delivery method for the project that you're undertaking. Perhaps it's a design, negotiate, build type of delivery technique. Then probably, and these are probables, not absolutes, but probably there'll be less frequent a need for meetings. There's typically a smaller, more cohesive team, perhaps, in a design, negotiate, build. So those meetings would not necessarily be on a reoccurring schedule, but maybe set up as needed between the owner, the architect, engineer, and the contractor. In an owner-build scenario, again, they might be less frequent. That relationship between the owner and builder is a more cohesive group. It might be they're one and the same. But again, these types of project deliveries would be meetings that were set up on an as-needed basis between the designers and the constructors. If you're, and Doug and I have experienced many of the jobs that we have done are design bid build, and these are more perhaps typical for agency kind of construction formats and rules, whether those are state agencies, federal agencies, or perhaps large owners. Then these meetings, kind of a delivery method may affect a weekly meeting, which is scheduled out in advance, perhaps for the entire construction period of the job. That schedule would be worked out in advance, maybe a typical day of the week at a typical time. And these meetings would involve the owner, the architect, engineer of record, the general contractor, and would expand in scope to include maybe other consultants who might be specialty consultants to the designers or particular engineers, acoustical consultants, kitchen consultants, and may also include suppliers, etc., for the groups that are brought together for these meetings. With a BIM kind of delivery method, building information models projects, the meeting schedules would be varied, of course, depending on the phase of the design or the phase of the construction, where you are in the project, and what phase is under development at that time. So they may be done more frequently in early phases, perhaps slack off in middle phases, and be more frequent later. And they too would involve the design team, construction team, the owner, maybe the consultants, the suppliers. And then if it's just straight design build, again, it would vary on the phases of design and construction, where you are with the project in the design process, and also it might involve consultants and suppliers as well. Doug, anything to add into that, or Matthew, any questions or hands raised?
Well, Matthew's checking questions. I would just add, as you said, a lot of times, depending on the delivery method or depending on the project, your meeting schedule may vary. I know a lot of times we'll meet more often when the construction is first getting underway, and as things get going and things are moving along, well, those meeting intervals may increase, so you're having less meetings. Maybe you're not meeting weekly during the middle section of the construction process, and then as things start to wrap up and things are picking up as you're trying to close out the projects, then maybe those meeting intervals increase again. So as Jim said earlier, the meeting should have a purpose. You shouldn't meet just to meet. And so if you have a project and you start out, we're going to meet weekly, and you find that those weekly meetings aren't needed, it's okay to eliminate the weekly meetings and go to monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings. Again, it's a respect for everybody's time and increases that team mentality. Any questions?
Yeah. Any hands raised, Matthew?
No, at the moment we have a pretty quiet audience today, so I'm going to let you keep going. I'm going to advance to the next slide. Sure,
absolutely. So where do we, in a typical project, talk about meetings? So these requirements are usually spelled out in Division 1 of the specifications, and typically where we establish all of the project administrative procedures. So, here we may talk about what kind of facilities are required, depending on the size of the team, the extent of the meetings, where you may need specific facilities and have those provided for on the job site, or where you may have the opportunity to use existing owners' spaces. They may be in contractor or designer's offices. And you'll also spell out here the frequency. You know what the delivery method is going to be for the project, so you would spell out when you can have these meetings, as well as who needs to be there to participate when you have these meetings. And you also may spell out particular topics for discussion and what the intentions are of those meetings. This would be a provision of agenda type items and specific bullets of interest that you want to cover or milestones that you want to discuss. And in many cases in firms that I have worked with, beyond the general conditions and the specifications in Division 1, we have created supplementary general conditions and sections that speak to, with more specificity, what exactly we want to do in these meetings. To include perhaps the provisions of particular items, tables, chairs, teleconferencing abilities. I recently worked on a project that had people in different areas, so they had projection and camera ability so that we could have two-way meetings with people that weren't on the site, and we could both visually and speech discuss and look at various issues. So you may expand in great detail on exactly what you require in the provision of meetings, not just in subject matter, but in material goods as well. And of course, in the individual specification sections with each item of the work, there may be specified, typically or specified required meetings, and we'll talk about those later, that get into actual construction, pre-construction types of gathering. So within the spec sections, specifics about meetings is often found as well. And so when you do take the opportunity to expand Division 1, it's important that in your supplementary information you are sure that you aren't undoing or undermining any of the requirements that happen to be found in the individual specification sections, and that those two things are closely coordinated as you provide more detail.
I would agree with that. I've seen instances where the general conditions or supplementary general conditions will say that the meetings are going to be weekly, and then the Division 1 section say the meetings are going to be monthly. And so you're automatically starting out with a conflict, and it just doesn't make you look good. You're the author of the book, and you can't get your meetings straight. So make sure you do that coordination amongst all of the sections so that the meeting information is consistent.
That's right. Matthew, let's go to the next slide and talk about the actual procedures and the administration of these meetings. So we touched a little bit on this, location and facilities. You know, where do you need to be for the most advantageous gathering? Is it at the site? Are there things that are particular to the site that you need to be able to see? Or is it at the owner's facilities in another location, so that people are sure where they're going when they're going to be there? And is it large gathering or a small gathering? And you know, will this be a long meeting, or is this a stand-up meeting? And I've worked with a lot of people who had frequent but abbreviated meetings that were very on target, very specific, task-oriented, quick looks, and these individuals like to have those meetings standing up because people resolved the issues and moved on. They didn't lollygag and sit around with their feet up. So there may be opportunities for you to have some of these meetings while you're standing. And of course, the schedule for the meetings is important to be established and be adhered to. It needs to be worked out in advance. And I'm sure that all of us have had the experience where someone who saw themselves in maybe a more authoritative position said, we're going to have these meetings on the first Tuesday of the month at 10, because that worked for their schedule, but it didn't work for anyone else's. So when you can, make this work for the majority. Don't make this a demand, but try to coordinate a time that works for people. You're showing that you're team-centered in the process of doing this. There needs to be notification to the appropriate parties so that that schedule can be on their calendars. We all have access to easy electronic information that can be repeated in our smartphones, and people have a better chance of showing up because they have better reminders. So be sure they're notified and that they're held at the appropriate intervals for the project. Those that are on the design side, thinking about the sequence of work and when meetings need to be held, and particularly when pay applications are processed, so that there are opportunities to schedule things that are at important intervals for the construction side. And that you schedule special gatherings as they're required by the project. If you're able to have schedules for the project that indicate critical milestones, then these milestones might be special meeting dates, so that you can gather around particular issues and look at those in close detail. Talking about the participants, we want to be sure again that the appropriate people are there for the issues that are on the agenda. How many times have we known we were going to have a meeting? We knew that we had a particular issue that we needed to resolve, and the people who were empowered to make decisions weren't at the table, only to delay us further. So those decision makers that are going to be addressing issues, which goes back to having an agenda out and enough time for people to have appropriate notifications, so that decision makers are at the table, make those decisions, and keep the project moving. Certainly will have a positive impact to the schedule, but also could have an impact to legal ramifications later if you don't have those primary decision makers available. Doug, anything to add to that slide?
Just that sometimes occurrences will happen to where you need to have an ad hoc meeting. It's not a regular scheduled meeting. And just as with the regular scheduled meetings where you are trying to coordinate and schedule them so that they work for the majority of the people, when those ad hoc or emergency meetings come up, do that in a cooperative manner as well. Ask people when they're available, suggest some dates, but don't say, okay, we're going to meet tomorrow on site at 2 o'clock, and that's the end be all, and everybody has to drop what they're doing to be there. Because that really does not foster that team building type of environment that we want to have.
And particularly now, maybe I shouldn't start it that way. Let me start over. With the frequency of projects being done globally, there are key players that may be several time zones away. And we all know what it costs to go buy a ticket for a flight tomorrow versus a flight in 3 weeks. And while you might not be able to wait 3 weeks, you certainly can make accommodations for special gatherings like Doug just said. Matthew, let's go to the next slide.
All right, and while that's going on, I just wanted to say Barry had a comment here. Just saying to note also he's experienced some contracts stipulate the frequency of meetings as well.
Right.
That's a good point. So that when you're writing your Division 1 specs, you need to coordinate with the construction contract, because it may be there, and it may also be in your design contract as to what the frequency of those meetings are going to be.
That's right. Well, so as we go through continuing the procedures and administration, of course, there is typically a party who is responsible to chair or run the meeting, responsible for keeping it on track and managing, setting the agenda, distributing that information, and sort of taking control of the meeting. And in doing so, they take on certain responsibilities, and one of those primary ones is to take the minutes. And who is responsible for those minutes being captured? You know, if it is the presiding party, that can be tough. It's necessary. It's critically important to capture factual information in those minutes. And as someone pointed out after the last webinar, if you are the person who is chairing the meeting, capturing the minutes can be really difficult and tricky. And, you know, I think that while silence is often awkward and can bother some folks, it's important to take the time and make sure those minutes are accurate. So if you do happen to be that person who's chairing and capturing the minutes, then it's really important to just let it take the time it needs to take. So as you're gathering those minutes, you know, where you were, what the date and time was, who was there, how those people can be contacted, and the essence of what the subjects were that were discussed is critical to capture. And then that information has to be distributed in a timely manner. The distribution of the minutes from the last meeting is certainly not best done when you gather for the next meeting and you're handing those meeting minutes out. People need a chance to digest them, and your minutes should include a requirement for folks to notify you if, in fact, there are corrections that need to be made. You know, these are not minutes, are not contract documents, and we need to remember that, but they can be some of the most important reference materials should your project head into the deep south and into the tank and everybody ends up in an adversarial position. Then the capturing of factual data and the communication of that data becomes very critical. Doug, anything?
No, we can keep going here.
Okay. So let's go to the next slide, Matthew, and talk about the types of meetings that we may have over the life of a project. And the first...
Sure, there's just... Jim, I was going to say there's a few questions here I think we want to maybe grab here quick.
Sure.
One coming in here says, in your experience, is it an advantage to have regular scheduled meetings on a particular day of the week? You know, they've seen that potentially early week meetings seem to be more productive. Have you seen similar experiences in your past?
Well, I'll go first and let Doug follow up too. I do think that particular days are better than others. First of all, I always try, but not always am I successful at not having meetings on typical bid days. In North Carolina, that's Tuesday and Thursday. It's hard not to because that uses up so much of the week, but you know, I try not to schedule them on those days, or if I do schedule them, I perhaps try to make them really early. I find that the earlier in the day you can have these meetings, the better, because typically the construction community is out and moving and on a job site early, very early in the morning, and they're sort of more used to having that early morning gathering. And I think earlier in the week the better. For my experience. Doug?
I would agree with that. I would add that I typically will try to avoid Mondays and Fridays as well. Mondays, when people are gearing up and getting ready for the week, I don't think is the best day to have a meeting. And if we're going to have one on Monday, the exception to having a meeting early during the day would be on a Monday, when I would want to have it later in the day so that people can kind of get settled and get a feel for their week and see what's coming in the emails and all that they've got over the weekend. So I would typically try to avoid Mondays and Fridays. Wednesdays, if they can work, I think typically work out well. As Jim said, here in North Carolina, Tuesdays and Thursdays are middays, and our bids are typically opened early afternoon. So if we have to have a meeting on a Thursday or a Tuesday, as Jim said, we usually try to shoot for after the bid opening time, typically at 2 or 3 o'clock, and try to keep those stores later in the afternoon.
So it's what we've done here is whittled it down to one day, but that's not it. Unfortunately, I'll say over the recent few years, Tuesdays and Thursdays haven't been too busy because there hasn't been much work. So, being reasonable too about what is going on in the current marketplace helps you make some decisions about meeting dates and time. You have more, Matthew?
Yep, there's two here about minutes, actually. One was wondering, who do you traditionally, or who do you typically have run these meetings, and then also take minutes? Is it the responsibility of the architect or the contractor, or is it really kind of a case-by-case basis?
Well, my preference is to do the minutes from the designer, the architect, engineer of record side. I just like to control them because I like to be in charge of what they say and how it is said. I don't try to pick sides. I try to be accurate, and I have found over time that because often we become the mediator of things, it's better if we drive the minutes. Now, I have had projects where the general contractor was responsible and did a fabulous job. Some of the best lessons I've learned have been out of their minute-taking system. Whether you have a set of minutes that starts fresh every time, or whether you have a set of minutes that retains items that are unresolved, thus embarrassing you into getting your decisions made, so that you don't have to see that every time that you go back to the meeting. And so I'm not saying that the architect is the only one who's capable at all. Doug, what about you?
I agree with everything you said. I have found that owners tend to expect the construction manager, when they have a CM on board, to do the minutes rather than the architect. So sometimes we have to deal with that, is that there's a CM, so the CM is going to be doing the meeting minutes and running the meeting. But if that's the case, make sure that you read those minutes, excuse me, when those minutes do get distributed, for any additional information or corrections that need to be made. As this Jim says, they are very important documents, even though they're not contract documents. When disagreements or disputes arise, they are considered accurate records unless you've noted an exception to them. So if you're not the one controlling them, controlling what's in them, writing them, you need to review them and make sure that they're accurate.
I worked at a firm where they attempted to have a sort of a standard practice, and it was not meant at all to be insulting, but the project manager for a project would always share the meetings, and the project architect would always capture the minutes, and they always went to the meetings as a team. and management felt like that was a way, and these were projects that had meetings once a month that were documented with minutes, and they felt like the project manager was in front of the owner and on top of things monthly, and the project architect was into the details of what was being captured and really was ultimately responsible for going back and being sure that things were resolved that came up in the minutes. So it made it easier for them as a team, and also, gave 4 ears instead of 2 to be sure they captured everything properly. I think it depends on the project and the size of the firm and how they operate, particularly, as to who would actually do the minutes. Matthew, any others?
There was just one more question that I think Doug was kind of covered, but wanted to make sure there wasn't anything else you wanted to add. Saying that even though meeting minutes are not contract documents, they do carry some legal clout, correct? And I think Douglas kind of talked about that, but I guess if there's anything else you wanted to talk about, the minutes being potentially legally requirements or legally admissible in court, but not necessarily contract documents.
Yeah, the minutes are not contract documents. Jim, I think that's the bottom or the last line on the slide that's currently on the screen. They are not contract documents, but they are deemed to be an accurate record of the events that have taken place at that meeting, those decisions that have been made, the items that have been discussed, and they are definitely admissible in court. Jim?
Absolutely, and they can be a Stinger missile right into your battleship if you document it properly, the things that have been talked about, and of course we could talk about examples of that over and over, but if there are delays because submittals aren't being returned, and that is the architect's fault, and that's being documented every month. When that goes to court, there's an established timeline there and an acceptable notice from the contractor to the architect that, I told you a month ago I needed these and I still don't have them. And that will absolutely sink you if that's being reported about you as a designer. That's just one example of many, but they are absolutely a admissible piece of, like any other correspondence that goes on the project during its life. Matthew, let's go to the next slide if we don't have any others.
Well, we're moving on. Continue forward.
Okay. So we'll talk about the types of meetings that are undertaken during the construction, and for many, the pre-construction is the first meeting that's held to kick off the construction phase, where you're establishing, the groundwork for the next phase of the project, for the rest of the project, setting the tone and the attitude, and trying to help everybody understand individuals' expectations. And I just captured a portion of information that's listed in the practice guide. Pretty voluminous, and I didn't want to try to go through each and every thing. So, these are some of those items that you would undertake at the pre-construction conference. Who represents whom on the project to start? Who are the people of authority? How do we communicate with each other? What are those lines of communication? And I'll say here just as an aside, one of the things that I feel like has been advantageous to me is at the beginning, at the pre-construction conference, I give my phone numbers to the owner and to the prime general contractor contact, the person, the decision makers, as we talked about a few minutes ago when we were talking about meetings. If something is wrong, if there's an emergency, if there's a critical item, if others on the project are disappointed in one another's performance and aren't talking, whatever the reason may be, I have found that when someone can find me and talk to me things will in the end be much better than if they try to chase me down, leaving me, voicemails and having to wait for me to check those. So I share my phone numbers. I give my cell phone number to those individuals. I give my home number to those individuals, and it has saved me many times. So those lines of communication and how you communicate are important. You can set the ground rules to say, this number isn't one you call every day to check in. This is when something's really wrong and we really have to talk. What duties are those that are responsible going to undertake, and how do they agree to communicate? And at this pre-construction, you're going to talk about distribution, submission, items of pathways of process. Are we going to go from A to B, or are we going to go from A to C to D, back to B? What is the pathway for how we share our information? Critical to talk about is payment and how that gets processed. Another aside here is doing your best to keep pay applications moving smoothly on a project will be time well spent. You will be developing a friend in the construction community if you are able to keep that in a smooth and consistent forward motion. You're going to talk about when the inevitable comes. Go back to the second line up there, you're managing expectations. So you're going to talk about change orders, change modifications, and how that goes, and that there are going to be some, that nobody in the room is perfect, and here's how we're going to address that when we come to those bumps in the road. We talk about the project schedule and how that gets submitted and reviewed, and whether it's approved or accepted. There's great debate whether everybody sits and signs it, but you're going to talk about the schedule and how that gets put into place for the project. And any other kind of critical issues that you need to look at as a team, and how you're going to agree to respond to those, and how you're going to interpret the drawings as you move forward and provide information to the field in the way that you can keep this project as much can as whatever your participation is, moving in a positive direction and not waiting for you to make a decision. Doug, anything you want to add to those?
I would add, I'd like to have my consultants attend the pre-construction conference and ask that the contractor have his major subcontractors attend as well. Those lines of communications are important, and they need to know that you're going to enforce them and follow them. You don't want the electrical engineer that's buddies with the electrical contractor because they worked on the last 3 projects together, having conversations that the architect and the contractor don't know about, and them making changes or agreeing to items. So I like to have those major consultants and subcontractors at the table. If there's a commissioning agent involved, I like to have him there so that we can all, as a whole team, agree on these procedures that we're going to be following.
That's absolutely right, and it's critical to have them and to have their buy-in to the procedures. Matthew, any comments we need to check on?
No, we're ready to go. So if you want, we can move on to the next slide.
Yep, let's do that. So after the pre-construction, or maybe as a portion of the pre-construction, you may have a site mobilization meeting. Of course, this one typically is held at the site. It is to review the limits of one of the items. Is the intention is to review the limits of the site and what the boundaries are, how the site is to be used, and there are important issues that are established. I've listed under all of these, and I won't say this each time after this, but that these lists are very long in the practice guide to give prompts of things for you to consider, and so I've just captured some of them and not all of them here. So how does the contractor, how does the owner access the site? How is that going to be coordinated if it's an existing facility? And what are the environmental control requirements so that the construction community understands your intentions of where things are going to happen on the site for environmental control? And things like the storage locations. You know, where is your benchmark? Where did you start the layout from on the site plans, and showing those in the field, actually touching those, looking at if it's an existing site, owner facilities and surrounding area conditions. And, you know, we talk frequently about site surveys and the transfer. First of all, who undertakes the site survey? Now, this is different from site mobilization, but let me stick with me here for a second. I want to share something that I just learned this past weekend. So typically we have a survey provided to us by the owner who has taken under contract a surveyor through the design team to survey the site and provide that to us. And it should contain right-of-ways, offsets, setbacks, etc. So one of the things that can occur at this mobilization meeting is a review of what the benchmark is for that site survey, how it's laid out, and I'm sure many of you have gotten requests for, you know, this survey information to be transferred electronically to the various parties. That typically comes through the owner, and I'm sure you've had your civil engineer be asked to transfer the same sort of information. It might come through you or might come through the owner that relied upon that survey to be accurate. Doug knows far better than me what a quagmire I'm opening up here, and how many this could be a conversation and a webinar all by itself, the transfer of documents. But I'll just share with you that an architect buddy of mine just received a CO on his personal office building. It is a mixed use. It's his architectural firm and his home. And so he was the owner and he was the architect of record. And he undertook a survey, and he relied on that survey. His engineer relied on that survey. And they built the project, and they completed the project, and they were having the final inspection, and they had taken care of all the items that the authority having jurisdiction had discovered. And it came time for the as-built site drawing that had to be filed in this municipality. And guess what? He had built over not just the setback, but he had built over the property line on one side of his building and over the setback, substantially over the setback, on the other side of his building. Fortunately or unfortunately, he had sold his home and business, and he literally had no place to live. So I just share this to say that what worked in his favor was at their site mobilization meeting, in which he had captured copious notes, there was a great discussion about this survey, and fortunately for him, the contractor and the surveyor knew one another very well and had transferred information back and forth, and the original surveyor was the person that the contractor used to lay out the building. So because it was that individual's bust, if you will, then he did not end up being obligated. On one side of his property, the city owned it, and they waived the right. They gave him a variance on one side. But on the other side, it was owned by an attorney who had his business in that building, and that ended up costing the general contractor over $10,000. My point in sharing that story is this. Don't underestimate the importance of a small meeting and taking the time to document that meeting well so that the transference of information is captured. And in fact, that's what saved my friend in this whole mess. So I'll move on to utility coordination meetings, also held at the site. Very important when you're working around existing utilities to review those. Particularly important for overhead and underground transference of power, gas, oil, whatever. And they used to establish important issues like reviewing the accuracy of those documents of the field conditions and verifying with ULOCO and never dig kind of numbers to locate services. Meeting with those utility providers who actually work with those companies to verify what's there and what's going to be accomplished, and to identify coordination opportunities and responsibilities as far as parties. And then the last here on this slide, and then I want to hush and let Doug talk and get any questions, is also meetings with the authorities having jurisdiction. A kind and generous request for time spent with them to look at the site before construction starts certainly sends a signal of respect and gives you the opportunity to meet the appropriate people, know who the folks are when you need to call for whatever might be needed, like permits, fees. It gives you an opportunity to talk about what they want to see and what they want to be on site for and what other meetings they might like to attend. Frequently I've had an invitation be extended to the inspections departments to come to meetings, and they don't get that very often and really appreciate it. And so have the opportunity to be involved throughout the construction. So, Doug, anything you want to pitch in there?
Just re-emphasizing a point that you made earlier about making sure that you have the proper people at the meetings, and in particular what came to mind in looking at this utility coordination. On college campuses, medical facility campuses, a lot of times you will not have good as-built information. But there'll be a guy, or there could be a guy that's worked on facilities on that campus for years and years and years, and he knows where that stuff is that you can't see that's underground. So he may not typically be one that you would have at a meeting, but you need to explore with your owners' reps, and if there's somebody like that, have them come to these meetings so that they can provide that information, and it'll help keep everybody out of a lot of trouble.
That's a great point. That's a great point, Doug. And actually, they can be folks even that are retired from a facility who are willing to come back, and you get them connected with the contractor and can save a lot of surprises. And they're tickled to still be able to help. Matthew, any questions from anybody?
Yeah, there's a comment here from Kevin just stating that he agrees with having subs attend the pre-construction conferences or meetings, but often subs are not engaged under contracts by the time of this meeting. So I don't know if you have any comments or feedback on that statement.
Well, I'll start. That's true. They often aren't, and sometimes I have even gone back to go through that conversation again in an abbreviated form when they were under contract. Often in North Carolina, we're seeing the requirement that primary subcontractors and sometimes beyond what they may define as important subcontractors are listed on the bid forms. So many times we do have the opportunity to have them there, but Kevin's right. In the way that projects are bought out in this day and time, they often aren't under contract by the time we have that pre-construction conference. Doug?
I don't have anything to add at this point.
Okay.
Okay, and then last question here. Do you request drafts of contractor documents ahead of time to reduce processing durations at critical times, such as change orders, peer requests, and RFIs?
I have never asked for a draft RFI. Pay requests, always want to see drafts so we can agree to it beforehand, and if we need to meet on site, have it coordinated, have it coincide with a regular meeting, project meeting. It just kind of helps everything go smoothly. If we're having a meeting on Thursday at 3, meet out there, you have a draft pay app. If you got some questions, you can ask the contractor, what about line item 23 here? I didn't see that when I was out. Oh, that's here. Let me show you. And so you can work through all those issues. So draft pay apps are definite. Draft RFIs. My take on RFIs is I've never asked for a draft, never seen a contractor offer a draft. I've often had them want to pick up the phone and call and ask me a question without sending an RFI through. I would prefer that they write the question down and send it to me and then pick up the phone and call me so that I've at least am looking at something while they're asking me what the issue is. What was the other document he referred to? Submittals, I don't know if that was one, but submittals, typically you don't get draft submittals, you get it and review it, and they may need to be revised and resubmitted. But I think other than schedules and as I said, the pay apps, I don't know that I've asked for draft documents from the contractor.
One of the things that I have seen, and perhaps this might be another part of the question, as we talked about supplementary general conditions, and I've seen firms who include those types of formats or even forms in that section, and in fact actually create a section that is for change orders, for example, and they will include their form that they won't use, or the request for interpretation form, or the pay application form, and they put those right into the specifications, often in their own supplementary section, and so that and require that the contractors involved on that project use those forms. Now, sometimes that creates a mess and people don't like it, and sometimes they pick that up and run with it. But one of the things that becomes an opportunity with that is, for example, when you've got predefined overhead and profit percentages and things like that, then they may include those so that it's easier and less likely to have a mistake or an oversight, from the contractor's side. So I don't know if that was part of the question too, but that might be something that you consider.
Yeah, and Jim, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I typically will try to reference or include standard forms, like forms from the AIA or forms from CSI, and I will typically add the language or a contractor's form that's substantially similar, so that it doesn't force them, if they've got a software package or have created their own forms, if they have the same information on them, I'm okay with that. And it's a matter of the information that you need being there and being in a format where you can easily understand it.
Matthew, are there any questions right now?
No, that would be all that we're on the screen now. So I've moved the next slide forward here. We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm thinking we're not going to get all the way through the rest in 2 minutes. I wonder if perhaps we want to come back and finish meetings in our next call. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, because there's still quite a bit to talk about. I think that's a good plan, that we can kind of wrap things up here. I'm showing it as 12:59, so we used up one of those 2 minutes, and maybe we can use the last minute to ask the group to again forward to you, myself, or Matthew any comments, any issues that they want us to discuss as we wrap up meetings next time.
I think so, and maybe particularly if the attendees could focus on meetings, perhaps some case examples of meetings of what you've seen go well or what you've seen go not so well that you could send that we could use as a prompt for discussion. I'd love to see some of those. So Matthew, I'll kick it back to you and close us out.
All righty. Well, with that, you can see on the screen here now Jim and Douglas's emails, and as they said, we'd love to hear from you for whatever major topics you think you might want to hear from in the future. I guess we will wrap up to this session next month. So with that, I guess we look forward to you guys in October. We'll finish up the topic of meetings and maybe start on some other smaller topics if we think we have time. But appreciate again for Jim and Douglas for being on the call. And with that, I guess unless Jim and Douglas, do you have anything else you'd like to finish up today? We'll let everyone go right on time here, and hope to see you all in October.
I just really appreciate everybody participating. Doug?
Yeah, thanks to everyone, and we'll look forward to meeting again on October 22nd.